Hello everybody and welcome to episode 34 of the Classic Rock Podcast. For those about to pod, we salute you. On this episode, Matt and I discuss our favourite rock autobiographies and biographies. My year in rock, this episode for Matt is 2016. Good luck with that. And we have, allegedly, the best part of the show, as always, Hidden Gem Time. But, as always, we like to kick off the show with latest news and features with Mr. Podcaster in the South, Mr. Matt Rogers. Hey, Matt.
Hello, Brian. There's no allegedly about it. No.
Where's the science? Where's the science-based proof?
Yeah. No, it's all anecdotal. It's all made up, of course. How are you? You doing all right?
I'm good. Yeah. Good. I'm enjoying the great weather that we're having. And keeping safe, not drinking too much and not getting sunstroke.
Very good. Yes, pleased to hear it.
Absolutely.
Pleased to hear it. Well, we're getting together this weekend, aren't we? This coming weekend. Looking forward to that. Steelhouse Festival down in Wales.
Absolutely. A little skip and a jaunt from Scotland all the way down to Abbeville.
A mere 9 hours.
9 hours.
Oh, man. Well, it is all downhill on the way down, isn't it, of course? You look at the map, obviously, Scotland, and all that. So, but going back, obviously, it's going to be all uphill. It might take a bit longer.
I've booked a whole day. I've got a whole day to travel all the way back home.
Yeah. Well, it'll be good to see you. Yeah, we're looking forward to Steelhouse. Full review in the next episode.
Exactly.
Of the likes of, Diamond Head are there.
They are. Europe are there.
Europe. Saxon, Inglorious, Graham Bonnet, Michael Schenker. Oh, dear. It's amazing.
Exactly.
Really looking forward to it.
It'd be fabulous.
From top to bottom, it's going to be a great festival. So, what has caught your eye, Brian?
So, Matt, there's a lot of stuff going on in the news at the moment, but one of the things that caught my eye, Bri, was the reunion of Pantera. So the two remaining members, Rex Brown, Phil Anselmo, are getting back together, and they have recruited Zakk Wylde on lead guitar and Charlie Bennett from Anthrax. So that'll be good. I have to say, I'm liking the way in which Zakk Wylde is talking about the tour being a celebration of Pantera, which is nice, because I think it's quite difficult to have a full reunion of Pantera without Dimebag and Vinny. So that's going to be interesting. I'll be going to that. If they come to the UK, I'll look forward to that.
You're a bit of a closet Pantera fan, are you?
I think Dimebag is probably one of the most interesting, influential guitarists of his generation. The fact that Eddie Van Halen buried one of his original Frankenstein Stratocasters is actually buried with Dimebag. He was revered as a guitar player. Such a nice guy as well too. So a lot of people when we've talked about Eddie on the show quite a lot, and a lot of people just see Dimebag as that next innovative guitar who just what he was doing with Pantera was quite groundbreaking in the early 90s, from where they started as a glam metal band.
That's right. Well, we're going to have to put some, of course, it's a good excuse to put some Pantera on the old playlist. Can I suggest a couple of things?
You certainly can.
My favourite Pantera song is a song called Mouth for War.
Right.
Which is an absolute killer song. Of course, Cowboys from Hell.
Yeah.
And Cemetery Gates. Enjoy.
For
those who don't know much about Pantera, have a listen, because they're sometimes overlooked in the pantheon of the big four.
Yeah.
Those sort of thrash metal bands, but certainly well worth checking out. And as you say, it'd be a nice tribute. As you say, I think Zakk Wylde's positioned it very nicely as a tribute to the name of Pantera, or the Pantera music, which is nice.
Yeah. There's
no kind of trying to hijack the name and dine out on it, because Zakk and Charlie Benanti don't need to. So that's good. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Yeah.
I've got a nasty feeling they might just do one date in the UK, of course. which would be fine by me.
It will be in London, or they might do the festival trails, so you might find them on. Maybe they'll do download.
Well, that's right. That's been mentioned, isn't it? They may well be on the 20th anniversary of download. And talking of gigs being more than just London, the boss, as in, you wrote to him and said, "Dear the boss, could you please, on your next British tour, play in Edinburgh?" And you got your wish.
I did.
You could walk to the venue.
Yeah.
But instead, you're coming to London, which is interesting.
I'm doing neither, Matthew. Didn't get tickets for any of them.
You can't get a ticket for Bruce Springsteen at Hyde Park. Oh my goodness!
Both the Thursday and the Saturday sold out so quickly, and Edinburgh as well too. There's been an outcry on social media. The usual. I was queuing on various ticket outlets trying to get tickets, and they sold very, very quickly. And one of the most renowned ticket sellers is using a process now, that they're calling dynamic pricing. People are able to, I'm not really quite sure how it works, but I think I'd really like tickets and I'm willing to pay X. So dynamic pricing's coming in, and it just sounds a million miles away from, quite honestly, Matt, Bruce Springsteen's the working class hero, etc. And working class people are now being priced out of going to see Bruce. So do you know what? He may do more shows. It's interesting that he's playing London on the Thursday and he's got London on the Saturday. So I wouldn't be surprised that he may, due to demand, he may do another couple of nights. Here's hoping.
Yeah, indeed. Well, interesting actually, because we went to see Pearl Jam a couple of weeks ago, you and I, about 48,000 other people. And that was the thing. It was the capacity at Hyde Park was, and probably is for Bruce Springsteen, even though it's a humongous park, of course, is limited to 50,000. Yeah. So maybe the same thing's happening. But yeah, talk about dynamic pricing. I mean, the price of stuff within the arena. Oh dear. I mean, there is a point where that whole thing starts to kind of wear thin. £7 for a beer, £2.50 for an ice cream, and £4.50 for an ice cream. Sorry, £5 for an ice cream. I mean, it's the world's gone a bit mad, and I think it's as you say. I'm not sure what control bands have over the pricing of those kind of peripheral things. Certainly, their own merch they would decide the pricing of, I imagine. Yeah. Or maybe the promoters, I don't know, but certainly the beers and the food and the ice cream and God knows what. It's quite an eye opener.
It is.
But anyway, so basically, this is an appeal on behalf of Brian Maley to all our listeners. If anyone's got a spare ticket for Bruce Springsteen either in Edinburgh or in London on any of those dates, you'll pay for it when you, of course, face value. But if anyone's got one, as a thank you, we shall give them a Those About the Pod We Salute You mug. Won't be a little cup.
I like the sound of that.
You see, everyone wins. You see, so please bear that in mind, folks. I know a couple of friends of mine who are going actually. So, fingers crossed that something comes up, or as you say, does another day. Anyway, we're dwelling a bit on Bruce Springsteen. In other news, Steve Morse has decided to leave Deep Purple after 28 years.
Yeah,
with the band, by far the longest-serving guitarist. I'm sure a lot of people still refer to him as the new bloke, but he's. I mean, and it's quite. Sad, but also quite refreshing that he's given up playing with Deep Purple to look after his wife, who's sadly battling cancer.
Yeah. So
we clearly wish him and his wife certainly very well for the future. Did you think about auditioning, Bri? Because you can play Smoke on the Water, can't you?
Yes,
just about.
Do you know what? I'd much rather Matt play play guitar in Deep Purple and sing in Deep Purple, the thought of singing Child in Time, Highway Star, or Speed King, oh, yeah. But if the set was 2 hours and 20 minutes of just playing Smoke on the Water,
be all right.
Yeah, be all right. Yeah. Be a bit boring for the crowd.
Well, true. Yeah, well, it would actually, but it's a good song, all the same.
Absolutely.
So just rattled off a few for the old list there, Deep Purple classics. To be fair, I'm not sure Ian Gillan really relishes or even does Child in Time these days. But it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. As you say, Simon McBride was drafted in a couple of months ago, and obviously will stay part of the band for the rest of this. What's it called? The Long Goodbye Tour?
The Long Goodbye Tour. They're coming to the UK. They're coming to the UK in the autumn, or for our American listeners, the fall.
Yeah.
See, so they're
multilingual.
They'll be winging their way through the UK, and they're playing Scotland, which is great. But hey, I think Blue Oyster Cult is supporting them as well too. But as you say, Matt, interesting if what Purple decide to do after that, because Steve Morse gave them a good shot on the arm when he joined in '96, and it's whether Purple decide after this cycle of touring that they were supposed to be writing a new album. There was a writing session whenever Steve Morse decided that he needed to step back from the band. So if I were a betting man, I think this might be the end of Purple for me, and a nice way to go out as they're not a tribute act. They do new material. That last couple of albums have been excellent, so it'll be interesting to see what they do. But Purple I think they've done very, very well with all of the changes and just the heritage and the legacy of Purple. I think it's in a good place, and for me personally, I think this might be the right time to bow out.
You might be right.
Yeah.
You might be right. It's probably an omen, a sign that it's time to call it a day. We've had a very long and illustrious career, of course, over 50 years. So maybe it's a good time. Talking of long and illustrious careers, see what I did there? Queen's greatest hits. Now, apparently, 1 in 4 households, probably in the world, but 1 in 4 households in Britain have got a copy of Queen's greatest hits. So I did a quick survey of the village that I live in, and it turns out that most people don't want to talk to me about Queen, which is fair enough, I suppose. They wonder what I was talking about. No, in all seriousness, so it was already the greatest selling album in the UK. It's just topped 7 million copies of the one album just in the UK.
Yeah.
Which is quite phenomenal. And the actual greatest hits album has been streamed, listen to this, 1.26 billion times in the UK alone. I mean, that's just mind-boggling numbers. I mean, just shows you. That came out in 1981.
I was going to say, it only covers career-wise about 7 years of Queen. About 7 years of Queen.
Yeah, exactly. So, good on them. 7 million of just one album. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And long may they continue, Queen, with Adam Lambert, of course.
Yeah.
Still with Brian May and Roger Taylor in the band. But yeah, good on them. It's just ludicrous numbers, isn't it?
And then final one from me, which I saw on social media during the week, which I'm very, very excited about, is John Waite of the big 80s power ballad Missing You, but he was in a band in the 70s called The Babies, and he also was in a fabulous band called Bad English with Neil Sean from Journey. He is getting together with Neil Sean possibly in 2023. Whether that will be Bad English or it's just the fact that John and Neil are getting back together, and that is just a wonderful combination guitar-wise and vocal-wise. So I'm very excited for 2023, and hopefully we'll see some new material from John Waite, who We haven't had much output from John in the last couple of years, and certainly in the UK we haven't seen him play live. And John Waite he's up there for me as one of those great AOR vocalists.
Yeah, got a tremendous voice.
Yeah,
and that. I mean, although he's English, isn't he? I think John Waite,
Lancashire boy.
Aye, very much in that kind of vein of that sort of rich AOR voice, a la Lou Gramm and Steve Perry and Brad Delp and so on. So should be very interesting. Anyway, got any more news, Brian? Oh, no. I've got to ask you a question, actually.
Okay.
So I went a couple of weeks ago. I went to see Dirty Honey and the Rival Sons, who were just tremendous. Dirty Honey, I think we mentioned them a couple of times. Are just going to be huge. I mean, they've got an album out which has got some great songs on it. They've got an EP out, which has been out for a few years. The album from last year, the self-titled debut album, is excellent. Check it out. But also the Rival Sons were there, and they were celebrating 10 years of their first album, Pressure and Time. So they chose to play that album in its entirety. So they did two sets, basically, the entire Pressure and Time album, and then a little break, 5 minutes. And then they played a kind of a mixed bag of greatest hits, which is good. However, it was quite interesting. It was a very good gig, don't get me wrong. It was very interesting, a very, very enjoyable gig, even though I got my ear protector stuck in my left ear in between bands.
Oh, goodness.
So, as we've often said, good idea to protect your ears, boys and girls, when you go to loud gigs or, around loud things and so on. But, mine got stuck in my ear, which, of course, was a source of much hilarity to everyone I was with. But I managed to get it out on the way home. You'll be pleased to hear. But anyway, that aside, Jay Buchanan from the Rival Sons didn't speak to the audience until well into the second half. Now, as we've often said on the old podcast, we quite like a bit of chat, and certainly a bit of kind of amusing chat in between songs, whether it be Dave Grohl or Spike or Phil Mogg. I like it, and I quite like bands who introduce their songs and maybe tell a bit of a story about them. There was nothing, and I found that a bit disappointing. Where do you stand on that, Brian? That kind of, well, firstly, playing an album in its entirety is very brave. I mean, you've got a very partisan audience, of course, so they're all going to probably know and have the album, but they're not talking to the audience for. Maybe I'm being kind of overly sensitive in my old age. What do you think about that?
I want to see a band interacting with themselves on stage. I want them to be looking as if they're enjoying themselves, because we feed off that. And I do think it is nice for a band to interact with the audience. So where I sit in that is I expect the front man to engage. You look at what Eddie Vedder did when we saw him at Hyde Park. There was a tribute to a Pearl Jam fan. There was people putting up cards saying, "Can you play this song?" And the band would play, fan favorites and songs they'd not played before. And to me, Eddie Vedder as a front man is human and becomes likable because he's connecting with his audience. If a singer sings a song, as matter how good he is, if he's not interacting with me or the audience, and he might be shy or he might just be in the moment and he might be just, I'm doing my job, but it might come off as a little bit aloof and standoffish from your audience, and he might not mean that, but I think you have to work an audience, Matt. A singer has to work his audience, so that means a bit of chat. Like it comes back to that classic case of David Lee Roth versus Sammy Hagar. I love Sammy's vocal, but I love how David Lee Roth entertains a crowd. So I would much prefer, and particularly, where did you see Rival Sons and Dirty Honey?
In London at the Forum, Kentish Town.
Forum, nice venue. he can see all of the audience. It's a nice venue. That, to me, if you're playing clubs and small theatres, you have the opportunity to interact with the audience, so do it. You can get away with it in your stadium because you can't see the audience, but I would expect in the likes of Kentish Town, you should be interacting with your audience and kind of being there. So, yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if anyone else got any similar thoughts on that. Yeah. So, that was the news, Brian.
Was indeed.
It was interesting. Always something interesting going on. Okay, so last time, young Brian, you set me the year 2016.
Yes, what a fabby year.
A mere 6 years ago.
Was indeed.
Or if you're listening in 14 years' time, a mere 20 years ago.
How many episodes will he have done by then?
I've no idea. We'll see.
Yes.
We didn't think we'd do 34, did we?
No.
Blimey.
No.
And here we are, episode 34. So 2016. I thought it was a good year. I went to tons of gigs, which I'll tell you about in a minute. It was a brilliant year for gigs. Some interesting ones. Albums wise, some good albums. I shall do a quick tour of the albums. The Temperance Movement, we've talked about a few times. My wife and I and a few friends of ours, we were religious Temperance Movements fans. And we'd follow them around the country. We went to see them in France. Sadly, on a strange hiatus at the moment. We'll see how that plays out. But in 2016, they released White Bear, which is a good album. Good songs on it. 3 Bullets, Get Yourself Free, Modern Massacre. Ola Rain's quite a poppy little song. Good album. You of course would have seen the Temperance Movement a few times at festivals. They seemed to pop up on every festival going, didn't they? Once upon a time.
It did. I liked certainly the debut album that they put out. I thought was fantastic, and I got to see them in the small venue called the Liquid Rooms in Edinburgh on their first tour. Phil Campbell's a phenomenal singer, an absolutely great singer.
Not to be confused, of course, with Phil Campbell from Motorhead.
Not at all.
Just in case anyone's wondering, different Phil Campbell, all the same. Also that year, excellent Blackstone Cherry brought out their Kentucky album, which is good. Another band. My wife's a big fan of BSC, like Blackstone Cherry, who are out again next year, touring this country with The Darkness.
They are indeed.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
And let's say we went out to Kentucky. Some good songs on it. An interesting cover of War. Do you remember that song? War, What Is It Good For?
Oh, it's Edwin Starr and Bruce Springsteen did it as well too.
Yeah, interesting. Shaking My Cage is a good song, which gets regular airplay to this day. You're not a big fan of Blackstone Cherry, are you, Brad? I don't think.
Will we talk about Rambling Man? We'll talk about Rambling Man later. Obviously, they headlined Rambling Man that year with Whitesnake. I actually really enjoyed them live. There's enough Southern rock in my iPod shuffle. And I kind of know what I like from a Southern rock. And maybe if one band falls out of it, things I like the more rootsier, the Blackberry Smoke, the more kind of Skinner-y type sound. Whereas I actually think Blackstone Cherry have a much more modern. They can sound a little bit Alter Bridgey in elements with the production, etc. So they're good, but they just don't float my boat.
No. They don't shake your cage.
They don't.
And finally, albums-wise, Metallica brought out, so we talked about once or twice, brought out the excellent Hardwired to Self-Destruct, which is a real kind of return to form for them, at least I thought so. Songs like Moth into a Flame and Atlas Rise. Some great songs on that album. very, very, very heavy. A real, as I say, return probably to their kind of early thrashy era. So yeah, those are the albums. Well, any albums? Did you buy any albums that year, Brian?
I did indeed. I have a few albums, and there's an album I'm going to pick you up on because there was I wrote. Obviously, ladies and gentlemen of the podcasting audience, usually whenever we do 2016 or other years, I often try and second guess what Matt's going to choose for albums. So I knew Temperance Movement was going to be one of the ones because it's a fabulous. And there's an album which you've left off, which if I had to bet my house on albums in 2016, you haven't mentioned it, but we'll come back to that at the end. So I've got a couple of albums which I'd just like to shout out. Marillion released the back end of 2016. Probably one of their, for anybody who's a long time Marillion fan, the album's called Fear, F-E-A-R. I can't on the podcast give you what that means. I'll let everybody look that up for themselves. But it was a return to form, quite a progressive concept album, which was fantastic. But a couple of probably some people we haven't mentioned on the show is a guitarist who played with Eric Clapton quite a lot, Doyle Bramall II. He brought out a fantastic rocky blues album called Rich Man, very much in a Joe Bonamassa type feel. And we talked about this gentleman earlier on who Zakk Wylde. So Zakk Wylde obviously goes out as Black Label Society from time to time.
Yep.
But Zakk is known to do a number of sort of solo albums and a bit more acoustic. And he brought out the second Book of Shadows album, which is a fantastic album. If you think Zakk Wylde is a long-haired pinch harmonics, Ozzy Osbourne, Shredmeister, listen to Book of Shadows and Book of Shadows 2 because it's a very, very acoustic. It's a great album. Sort of hints of Lynyrd Skynyrd, quite acoustic. You'll enjoy that. So that's 2016 album wise for me. And the album, I'd have bet my house on.
Yeah, well, you can hold on to your money, my friend, because I was going to lead into that. I know you're going to say, because I've got a little story to go with it, which I may have told before. So finally, on albums, and I left this to the last, of course, Diamond Head. The aforementioned, I'm not sure we mentioned Diamond Head very much in this podcast, but they brought out their self-titled album called Diamond Head back in 2016. And the reason I held it back was I went to see Diamond Head, and I've told this story once or twice about when I met Brian Tatler in the London Islington O2 Academy.
Okay.
And I went up to him and said, hello, Brian. I didn't remind him that I met him in 1982 this time. He certainly wouldn't have remembered that. But I did say, look, I really like the new album, Brian. He said, oh, thanks very much. What's your favourite songs? I thought, oh, no, I didn't know it was going to be an exam, a test. But of course, being an aficionado, I said, well, I really like All the Reasons You Live and Silence, which is the last track on the album. Two killer songs. Certainly All the Reasons You Live. We'll put the video of that on the old Facebook page as well. But so luckily I got through that. He said, sadly we're not playing Silence, but we'll play All the Reasons You Live. So he was very gracious, as always, Mr. Tatler. So yes, that was certainly my album of the year. Diamond Head by Diamond Head. So moving on to gigs, I mentioned I saw them. Saw quite a few gigs, actually. You and I went to see Dave Gilmour at the Royal Albert Hall.
Yeah, I had that on my list.
Which was a fantastic experience. And did a lot of Pink Floyd stuff, of course. Comfort Me Numb, I seem to recall, was quite something. Shining Crazy Diamond, of course. Just one of the greatest gigs I've ever been to, frankly. As I said, at the Albert Hall, which I really enjoyed. So a few weeks after that, I saw Bad Company, also in London. Probably the only date on their tour. Do
you remember who was supporting?
I do. It was Richie Sambora, who was pretty good. Well, he did a few solo songs, and I'm a big fan of his solo work. I think he did Stranger in This Town, from memory. Orianthi playing guitar with it. Yes. See, the memory's still there, Brian. Memory's still there. So who else do I see? I saw Diamond Head, as I said earlier, of course. So yeah, usual array of gigs. We went to Rambling Man, as you say. We're Whitesnake headlined.
Yeah.
Also Europe. So it was. I mean, I could rattle on for ages about the gigs in that year. You must have been to a few of them as well, Brian. I seem to recall. As I said, we went to one or two together. Any other standout gigs for you?
The one gig which stands out for me in 2016 was when we all got together and went to the Genting Arena in Birmingham, where we went to see at the time the recently reformed Rainbow with
That's right.
Mr. Richie Blackmore and his merry band of men, and that was just an amazing night. Ronnie Romero, who was obviously the lead singer in the band, he covered all of the eras very well, particularly the Dio stuff. Standout track of the night for me was Stargazer. I think I was levitating off my seat whenever they did Stargazer. Yeah. But Richie was up to his old tricks, wasn't he? He'd play a little snippet of a Purple song and then he would go on to something else. So that was a highlight. I obviously didn't. Bad Company went against the grain and actually played a couple of shows outside of London. So I got to see Bad Company and the RSO, the Richie Sambora show. I remember in Glasgow, his last song, or maybe it was the encore, he did a version of Living on a Prayer, and he brought a young fella out to play a bagpipe solo in the middle of Living on a Prayer, Matt. And you're kind of going, this is just not going to work. And bless him, they brought the band down and this young fella played a bagpipe solo in the middle of Living in a Prayer, and it kind of worked. There's video footage on YouTube. Go and watch it. But when you're in the heat of battle and you're expecting Richie to be doing, his solo stuff, as you say, is fantastic. But I'll never ever forget Living in a Prayer with a bagpipe solo. Again, a great year, 2016 for gigs.
Yeah, absolutely. On a sad note, we lost David Bowie in 2016.
We did.
Which was, it was really the start of that. There were quite a few people that passed away in the sort of music world, that passed away in the sort of late 60s, early 70s in that era. And Bowie was one of the first ones died of cancer at 69. And of course, left a fantastic legacy of work over many years. But of course, sorely missed. And who knows what he would have been creating now if he'd have lived. But sadly passed away in 2016.
He did, and we lost the E and the L of ELP in 2016. Keith Emerson and Greg Leck as well too.
Okay, so that was 2016, and the next time, young Brian, this is how it works. If you remember, I will set you a year.
Yep.
And you'll take us back down Nostalgia Boulevard.
Yep.
And that year, you ready?
I am indeed.
You're gonna like this. 1995.
Oh, right. Brilliant. I just left university.
Really? We haven't mentioned your 15 years at university recently, have we?
Well,
we need to rehash that one.
Exactly.
Yeah, I enjoy that.
1995.
Is it still a world record? I think it is, isn't it?
It is indeed. So, Matt.
Yes.
You are a keen reader.
Oh, well, absolutely. Yes. As I've said before, I get through 3 or 4 books a year. So I've got a voracious appetite for books.
Excellent.
Clearly. Yes. Thanks for asking.
So one of the things that we wanted to discuss on the show, and we've kind of talked about some of our favorite books or books that we've been reading. We decided in this episode of the show we would go through some of our favorite biographies and autobiographies of some of our favorite artists and some people who maybe just tell the stories of behind the scenes against the backdrop of what happens on the roads or what happens with their bandmates, etc. So we're going to go through some of our favourite rock biographies, but also, which is going to be even more interesting, is who are the artists that we haven't heard or haven't put pen to paper yet that we're desperately wanting to read those autobiographies. So what are you going to kick us off with, Matt?
Well, yeah, I mean, the world of rock does seem quite prolific in terms of autobiographies. Both of the actual performers and some of their kind of support crew, as it were. One of my favourite autobiographies is by the late, great Pete Way. So Pete Way was the bass player in UFO, fantastic British band. And we talked about once or twice, had their high point in probably late 70s with Strangers in the Night. But Pete Way, his autobiography was called Fast Ride Out of Here, which is a line from the song Shoot Shoot. And it's very much a warts and all story. And he led a very colourful life, sadly a lot of substance abuse, a lot of alcohol abuse, but he was very open about it, very candid. But he spent time, the interesting parts, for example, he was recruited by Sharon Osbourne to be Ozzy Osbourne's kind of minder, as it were.
Yeah.
Which was sort of a bit like putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank kind of thing. He's also one of the last people to see Bon Scott alive back in 1980. They were out partying, and I think the night before Bon died, or the night Bon died.
Yeah.
Very interesting, colourful autobiography. If you get a chance to have a read of that. I think we both liked Dave Grohl's book, didn't we? Storyteller. I think I got that. I bought you that for Christmas, didn't I, Brian?
You did, indeed.
Cool.
Yep, you did.
You're still wading your way through it?
I'm halfway through it. I'm not fully, you know me, I'm not as...
prolific.
Prolific. Yes.
Yes, it's a good book, actually. It's well worth a read as well. Made more poignant by the sad passing of Taylor Hawkins. There's a passage in that book where he talks about him and Dave Grohl and Taylor Hawkins going on a road trip across the US. I think they go from California to see Dave's mum who still lives in Virginia. So yeah, very poignant book, but very, very well written. I think it was kind of ghost written, as is quite often the case. But yeah, if you haven't read either of those books, check them out. What about you, Brian? Over to you.
I was trying to think about which books I've read which have left me with either a lasting impression of the artist, or it's given me a real good insight into what that person was like. And the first one, which I read, I remember reading early in the 90s. So obviously I was at university.
Of course.
Was David Lee Roth, Crazy from the Heat. And it's as mad and kooky as David Lee Roth is, it isn't a chronological start from beginning to end, but it just goes through his experiences in Van Halen. Obviously, at the time, whenever he left Van Halen, I think he was off doing his rock climbing. It's just a very, very funny story, but it also has David Lee Roth's poetry in it as well too. And really? I just for all of the kind of the stories, I walked away from the book going, I like David Lee Roth. He is the party guy that you see on the TV and the showman that he is. How the book is written is fantastic. So Crazy from the Heat, and it's not a tome of a book. You can read it quite quickly. The other one, which I'm going to call out, which is more of a biography, Matt. And as everybody knows in the show, I'm a massive Thin Lizzy fan. There's so many books that have been written about Phil Lynott and Thin Lizzy, but one which I read, which was written by, I think, a Kerrang, one of the contributors to Kerrang, which was Mark Putterford, and it's a book called The Rocker, and it's a story of Thin Lizzy and Phil Lynott. It's very, very interesting, and it's a bit like the Pete Way book. It's warts and all, and it's really interesting around the time of Live Aid, where Bob Geldof made sure Phil was not in a great way, and so you know, as a Thin Lizzy fan, I enjoyed it, and it backed up some of the just the myths and legends that you hear about Phil in it, but it didn't sugarcoat it. So that was a very well researched book. It wasn't taking lots of sources from Wikipedia and whatever and just putting a book around it. Very good book.
Yeah. That's a good point, actually, because some biographies and autobiographies, and of course there are going to be loads that people are going to think, oh, why don't you mention this and why don't you mention that? Of course, you got your favourites. Please put them on the Facebook page or tweet them at the FT80 pod, of course. Also on Instagram now, of course, aren't we? Mm-hmm. So you're right. Sometimes, certainly the biographies, there can be a kind of a cut and paste of interviews and articles, and I think I read Robert Plant's biography, which is very similar. I was really looking forward to it and got through it, and it was very much kind of cobbled together from interviews and articles from Melody Maker and NME and so on. But you're right, the quality is certainly, and also the themes. Sometimes you know what you're in for. I remember reading Ozzy Osbourne's book I Am Ozzy, and it was, warts and all is one way of putting it. Left you with a very bad taste in your mouth, as it were. Funny as some of the things are, also some of them are quite, unpleasant. Let's say some of the antics that he got up to. We mentioned Rob Halford's autobiography recently, which I think you read as well, Confession.
Loved that.
It was good, wasn't it? I mean, that was very, very much, I would imagine quite often with writing autobiographies, it's sort of a cathartic experience, because with Rob Halford, as a gay man, essentially gave his story as firstly a gay man in Priest who couldn't, for various reasons, didn't feel confident enough to come out, as it were. He came out in the early 90s. But certainly an interesting read. Very graphic at times, as you might expect. As you say, no punches held, but again, a good read, a very good read too.
The first book I'm going to call out is it's a book called Riding Shotgun, and it's 35 years on the road with Rory Gallagher and 9 Below Zero. So Jerry McAvoy was the long-serving bass player for Rory Gallagher. He was the only constant member of all of Rory's 14 solo albums from 1971 through to 1991. So there's nobody better to give you the story of Rory Gallagher than Jerry McAvoy. And obviously, sadly, Rory's no longer with us, but it's a fantastic book where Jerry tells you what life on the road is like, and working for Rory Gallagher, the ups and the downs. So that to me was a really interesting read for the Rory Gallagher fan that I was. And I think most fans who've read it sort of go, well, it's probably the book out there at the moment that you just want to read from Rory. And I suppose it's really down to the only person that could probably better is it Donald Gallagher, who's Rory's brother, who was the manager of Rory. And the final one for me, which was interesting, and I love this book, it's a book called A Heart Life, and it's the life story of the former Deep Purple and Rainbow tour manager Colin Hart. And Colin Hart, was the tour manager. So all of those stories about Richie and all of the antics that he got to, because he was such a prankster, to hear it from the tour manager. And I have to say, when you hear the phrase long suffering, Colin Hart was put through the ringer by Richie Blackmore and the Rainbow guys. But it gave you that little bit of an insight around his life on the road as a road manager and trying to corral and herd the cats that were Deep Purple and Rainbow. So there's a couple of books which are a little bit maybe not focusing in on the spotlight of a Richie Blackmore or Rory Gallagher, but you hear in the story from Jerry and Colin Hart's perspective.
So that was some of the biographies and autobiographies we've read, Brian. But who would you like to hear from? Whose autobiography would you like to read? Having your Christmas stocking at some point.
And you can just there's a couple that just come straight to mind for me, Matt. Lord David of Coverdale. Mm-hmm. David. I'd lovely to hear David's perspective on Deep Purple, Whitesnake, working with Jimmy Page. I think that would be and he's such a raconteur anyway on stage. So how he'd be able to replicate that in a book.
Well, he's got some time on his hands now, hasn't he? So he might be able to put that together. You never know.
Yeah. I'd love to hear from Mutt Lange. Because we hear all about, you think about all of the classic albums we've talked about in the show, Back in Black, Hysteria, Foreigner 4, just so many albums.
Being married to Shania Twain.
Yeah. I'd love to hear what it was like from his perspective. Make it happen, Matthew.
Well, it could. You never know. You never know. I'm sure one or two of those we'll hear from. You mentioned raconteurs. We also mentioned UFO earlier. Phil Mogg, the singer of UFO. I think he is very similar in a way to Pete Way's autobiography. Would be a very colourful read, I think. Robert Plant has never put pen to paper, as it were, and I think his autobiography would be very interesting. Although when he's questioned about the 70s, he does pretend he's lost his memory, which is Robert's way of saying, I don't want to talk about it. And because a lot went on in that era, of course, he probably doesn't want to talk about. I think Joe Elliott, you mentioned Mutt Lange earlier in the context of Def Leppard, but I think Joe Elliott from Def Leppard would be an interesting read. Again, a very, very interesting character, a good kind of storyteller. And I think he would make a good autobiography. So who knows? We may hear from them. And of course, we'll be very interested to know from our listeners. How many are we up to now? 13? Is it still 13, Brian? 13. Okay. We'll be interested to hear from you, your recommendations, biographies, autobiographies, and also who you would love to hear from. And maybe one day, Brian, as we've said many times, we will write our memoirs. Maybe we should do it together.
Yes.
Memoirs of a podcast. That should be our autobiography, shouldn't it?
Memories of a wait, but then we're missing out. If we did two, did, it's a bit like the 4 Kiss solo albums.
Yeah, different sides of the story. Yeah. It's a good point actually, because there's 2 sides to every podcast.
Yeah, my story could be, if we split up and you get somebody else to replace me. The title of my autobiography might be Dark Side of the Pod.
Yes. And mine would be in a similar vein, Wish You Were Here.
Yeah. Wish you weren't here.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned the sister podcast for a while. We'll come back to those at some point. For those about to line dance, of course, and for those about to pop. I'm sure someone out there is thinking, I can't find them on Spotify. You have to look a bit harder. Right. So that was a quick whistle-stop tour through biographies and autobiographies from the rock fraternity.
Yep.
So we therefore come to the best part of the old podcast by far. In my opinion, and many others, I might add. And that is...
Hidden Gem Time.
Thank you, Lola, as always. Beautiful voice. So what you got for us, Brian? Episode 34?
Something that we talked about at the beginning of the show. We were talking about Steve Morse. And I was just thinking about how Steve just gave a shot in the arm to Purple. So the hidden gem I'm going to choose is Perpendicular, which is the 15th studio album from Deep Purple. So that's the first album which featured Steve Morse, and it is an absolutely fantastic album. First track on the album, Vavoom, Ted the Mechanic, Loosen the Strings. The single off that was released here in the in UK and Europe is Sometimes I Feel Like Screaming. It's just such a great body of work. When you consider that the last album that Purple had recorded in 1993, which was The Battle Rages On, which was the last album with Richie on it and Ian Gillan's processed vocals and all that kind of stuff. When you listen to this album Perpendicular, it's just a return to form, and it's great that Steve Morse came in. And sadly I didn't get a chance to see Purple on that tour, but the Perpendicular tour is cited by many as a return to form for Purple, and they just were playing fantastic shows. So I think the Steve Morse era of Deep Purple gets overlooked from a recording perspective. So I'm going to suggest Perpendicular, released in 1996. How about you?
Very good. Well, yeah, thank you. So I've got a documentary. Quite often have documentaries, don't I?
You do?
I do. I must watch a lot of TV. No, it's one of those things, actually. I was flicking around on Netflix and I came across this documentary. It's called Count Me In. And it's a very well put together piece of work revolving around drummers, essentially, and their influences. They've got plenty of the obvious influences in terms of Ginger Baker and John Bonham and Stuart Copeland and Dave Grohl and so on. But it's very well put together. And it's very interesting. There's plenty of talking heads. The late Taylor Hawkins, Hobber Heddon's on there, the drummer from The Clash. Nico McBrain's on there. And Chad Smith, very interesting character, talking about the influence of Keith Moon. And Ben Thatcher's on there from Royal Blood, and so on. Really good watch, and well worth checking out. So go and have a watch of Count Me In on Netflix. You've seen that. You've seen it as well, haven't you, Brian? I think
I have indeed. It's a great documentary. It's fantastic when you get to see, like, Chad Smith. I love watching Chad Smith, and I think at the end of the documentary, you get a number of the drummers having a drum off, and you've got the likes of Carlos Santana's wife, who is a fantastic drummer, and then you've got Chad drumming, and then there's a young. They feature, there's a lot of artists who are up and coming, and there's a young lady drummer who is
Jess Bowen.
She was. It was fantastic because it showed you her putting her kit together for the battle, and she shredded the kit. She was fantastic. So it's great. It's great the drummers are getting their, I suppose, a little bit of spotlight, and fantastic. I really, it's a good recommendation of a hidden gem map.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Thank you. So that was it, Ryan. Episode 34 in the can.
One take.
Enjoy that?
Yeah.
One take. The One Take Brothers.
I wish.
Mainly one take. One day we'll send out the unedited version. if we might have to bleep the odd word out. But yes, thank you for listening, everyone. We always appreciate it, and please tell your friends and keep spreading the word. Come and see us on Facebook, on Twitter. What's that Twitter handle, Brian? Remember that one?
At FTAT Pod.
Very good. Well done. Also, we're on Instagram. So we'll see you next time for episode 35.
See everybody. Take care. Rock on.
I'll see you at the weekend, Brian.
For those about to pod, we salute you is a Mealy Rogers media production.